Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth episode of The Second Opinion. I'm Arvin, your moderator for today, and we have with us.
Hello, it is Nabil.
I'm CK.
I'm Neve.
And obviously me. Now, moving on, today's topic is euthanasia. Now, just for the viewers, a brief definition. Usually, euthanasia is said to be the process where you end the life of someone who is in pain. Usually, this refers to physical pain, but we'll talk more on this later on. So, is everyone clear with the definition? Okay,
Yes.
Good. Right. So, moving on. The first question I'd like to ask everyone is, do you think euthanasia should be legalized?
It's always a complex question, but personally, if you're just going to take a logical approach to this, you would only consider euthanasia if, and I quote one of an article that I've read online by The Guardian, which also quoted a research paper, but basically you only implement euthanasia when a person is suffering something unbearable, usually just pain, and there's no prospect of improvement. And most of the time it's a case that usually ends up with death. In that case, you would say a mercy killing in this sense to put them out of their misery. So if you're just taking that and none of the other confusing aspects, yeah, I would say euthanasia should be legalized.
Same goes for me. I also think that euthanasia should be legalized because you are actually helping the patients, because he or she already have an incurable disease and it will not get any sooner, but every day he or she will just suffer from pain. That's it. And also, I think that if he or she wants to end his life and it's his decision to do it, so doctor should do that. And also, by doing this, his friends or family can also ease their pain also, because if he just stay in the hospital, the pain to see him every day, to see him suffer every day, and also the bills. So actually, I think it's a good thing to do euthanasia.
I agree as well. I feel like it's the compassionate thing to do, in the sense that not necessarily talking about euthanasia per se, but the act of legalizing it gives people the option if they so choose to do so. I understand that there are people who have their reservations, like there could maybe be some religious arguments against euthanasia, but it's important to take into account that when you legalize something, it's affecting everybody, and not everybody has the same beliefs as you or the same attitudes towards certain topics. So by legalizing it, you make sure that you give everyone the option whether they want to do it or not.
Well, just to add on just a little bit, and maybe just to give a little hook, I would say, but while you two do make really good points, and I think in a perfect world, this would be a great idea. But the thing is, one of the complexities that I talked about that we usually avoid when we're talking about this, but in this case I'm going to bring up, is it is the dying person's right to not demand for it, but to just, hey doc, I can't bear this anymore, please just end it right now. And it's all well and good, but then perspectives do matter a lot here. And the thing is, it's not just you and the doctor, or the doctor and the dying person. There's also the family members who may or may not agree with this. And then there's also the question of whether the doctor can do this properly. Because sometimes it's not just a simple matter of sticking the needle and pushing down on the plunger. It's a lot more. And normally, if you read up on this, you'll know that there's usually a board who reviews cases on euthanasia. So they get a case from someone who's requested for it, and on that board you get a doctor, someone who specializes in ethics. I'm not entirely sure what the term would be there.
Ethicist.
Right, no surprise then. But something that not many people would think of at first is also a lawyer, because this is also a legal matter. And then when you bring medicine and law together, you get a few hijinks somewhere, anywhere, especially concerning death.
And euthanasia is not only for humans, but for animals as well. Because I saw that many articles or news or even videos, like the YouTubers, I saw them like their pets, no matter it's cats or dogs, they got tumors. Maybe it's sticking out like neck or somewhere else, and then they video the whole process of from the day they start to realize that they got tumor until the end. Some actually record euthanasia before that, or some already died before euthanasia. And also, this is the pain of the pets and also the owner as well.
I actually never considered that. That I mean, yeah, you are right though. Like it actually happens very commonly. Like if a horse that's broken its leg, usually they just euthanize.
But that isn't mercy killing. That's more like it's not useful anymore. I mean, I know they're in a lot of pain. I know they can be in a lot of pain.
So that's in a way it is mercy. Even like you have say dogs that have gone blind and maybe like say it's really really old and stuff. It can't really take care of itself anymore. Like it's not gonna be able to survive.
Yeah.
So like they just kill it anyway. That's the thing too.
That does make sense. But I mean, I hate to focus on horses, but really, I've never noticed a case, and I'm gonna take something that I wouldn't usually quote. But have you guys read Black Beauty?
Yes.
The book about the horse. No? Okay, so there's a particular scene where, and it's a very pessimistic book on the situation of the horse, and not to mention this was like Victorian times, so pretty old, but still, contrary to humans euthanasia, animal euthanasia I feel like it's mostly done because the animal's no longer useful to humans, which is more of not exactly a viewpoint a lot of people would like, but it is a true thing.
As well. I agree with that as well.
I mean, imagine killing a guy because he couldn't work anymore.
True. But then again, we aren't animals.
No, we are animals.
Okay, yeah, that's true as well.
Kingdom Animalia.
But actually, yeah, like those are interesting points, particularly when you contrast like animals and you shouldn't say animals, other species and humans.
Other species and humans.
In terms of euthanasia, some of the main arguments really, when I asked you guys, should it be legalized, you guys were fine. You guys said it's mercy killing. You guys, you're ending the pain. It should be right. Religious belief shouldn't be there. But for doctors, really, it isn't even a question of religious belief. It's a question of ethical sort of considerations, especially like professional ethics. Because in the original Hippocratic Oath, one of the one of the terms was like a doctor should not kill and should not either prescribe poisons or give any such counsel, basically.
True.
A doctor isn't supposed to kill. That's like the idea, I would say. Obviously, in modern oaths of service that doctors take, like that's changed. Like that thing isn't there anymore. But it is something to think about. So like as doctors, for those who are medical students, and even for those who aren't, it's something to think about. Should doctors be encouraged to kill their patients? Essentially is what it is.
It does set up a precedent. Like in an unusual, you can't even say it's specifically, because if a doctor decides in one case to kill, I'm not going to say kill, but to euthanize the patient, and he decides not to do it for another patient, depending on the situation, we know that not everyone's going to be happy with that kind of thing, and it definitely affects the doctor as well.
I mean, that's why like the countries that do have euthanasia legalized have very specific procedures in place. Like you mentioned, I think that there's a board of people that will decide. There's a lawyer, there's ethicist, and everything.
I mean, doctor can do this because it is the right of the patient to whether to continue to end his life. It's not a doctor that decide the life, but because of the patient, they want it, so they tell the doctor to do that for them. So I agree that doctor have the right to do it.
But I understand what you meant. Like there's basically another layer of gatekeeping involved, because the doctor decides ultimately, not necessarily just the doctor, but the people who are involved in the process decide ultimately whether this person gets to choose whether they want to die.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, even if you do legalize it, one of the things you do learn in medicine is that the patient doesn't have the right to they can't demand for treatment. Am I right on saying that? Or is it the other way?
We distribute treatment according to needs.
According to needs, but we can refuse not to treat them as well, right?
That's a very grey area in medicine, to be honest, because it honestly depends on who you ask as well, to a certain extent. usually it's like this. A doctor can refuse a certain treatment if the patient can get it elsewhere without too much hassle. Simply put,
Okay.
you can say that. So say, for example, say I'm a doctor, say I don't think euthanasia is right, and a patient comes to me saying I want to be euthanized. You can refuse if the patient can just go to another doctor, and it's not a hassle for the patient, as in too much hassle.
Like, we could refer them.
In a way, yes.
Why the doctor refuse the patient?
Personal beliefs, maybe.
Yeah. But then I can give another case, and this is an interesting one. So we all know that it's the right of the patient whether they can ask or not. But then when you introduce something as the mental state of the patient, then it becomes a bit more confusing. What do you think about patients with dementia or something like that, where they're not in the right state of mind to ask for it, but they're visibly they're requesting for it. Yeah,
You can see they're in pain.
Exactly.
Doesn't that go to the next of kin then? The responsibilities and everything?
That is true. But then what if...
It's a bit shady if... It does sound a bit ethically wrong if someone else were to decide
whether you should live or die.
Yeah.
I think before the patients
Alright.
to go to the doctor to do saying that they want to do euthanasia, they must show the doctor a report of stating that they are in the right mind, they don't have any mental issues or what. So in that case, doctor see that they are actually in the right mind. So then only doctor can say that they really want to end their life. But if without that report, maybe they are just under depression. So actually this case can be saved by his friend, family, to encourage him to continue to live.
Okay, that's true if you're talking about sort of depression and those line of mental illnesses. But I think, CK, the issue is if you have someone who simply lacks the ability to make competent medical decisions. Say someone who, sometimes they are mentally immature. Say they have the body of a 20-year-old, but the mind of a 5-year-old, something like that. In those cases, they're not depressed or anything, they are in pain. So say, I don't know, end-stage cancer or something.
Yeah.
They're in pain, they want to die, but at the same time, they don't have the competence to decide. So, Neve said, just letting the next of kin decide is shady.
It is shady. Especially when death is almost certain. If you're talking about end-stage cancer, that is.
True, that is very true.
Mm.
But one thing though, I will just raise here, just a couple of questions ago, CK raised this, it's the right of the patient whether he or she wants to live or die. That is not necessarily true, and here I'd just like to draw the line for the listeners as well. Assisted suicide and euthanasia is different.
Yeah, we should have defined it in the beginning, actually.
Assisted suicide is more towards you as a person, an individual, can just say, I want to die, and the doctor will basically kill you or assist you in your suicide. That's assisted suicide. Euthanasia is more towards where there's a legitimate criteria or need for the death. So you are in pain, for example, or there's just no cure, you aren't going to get better anymore. So that kind of thing. That's euthanasia. So it's a bit different. So legally, in Malaysia, for example, the patient doesn't have the right to die. You have the right to live, you don't have the right to die. Even
if you're brain dead, in a coma with...
That is different in Malaysia. I believe that if you are brain dead, you can turn off life support.
You can.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
But again, there's these things a lot of the time there's a problem with the definition. If you're talking about brain death, how do you define brain death? How until what degree of damage would you accept until it crosses the line and becomes brain death? Say, for example, in some people, the brain stem is still functioning. So they can breathe, their heart rate is normal, their basic life functions are all there, but other parts of the brain are gone. They can't talk, they are not human in the sense that we would understand anymore.
Wait, so unresponsive. Could you include that?
You can't really say unresponsive. Medically, if you shine a light, you shine a light in their eyes and stuff, you might see some reaction because the brainstem is still functioning.
That part.
By unresponsive in that they can't talk, they can't walk. Yes,
But they are aware.
maybe not. We don't know.
We don't know, so that's something else.
But usually if other parts of the brain are dead, we can assume that they are probably not aware. If only the brainstem is there, because higher order thinking, you need the other parts of the brain as well.
Very true. In
But-
those cases,
Yeah, so you start to get a lot of gray area and issues that are difficult to define. But sort of going back to euthanasia, I'll raise this one point. What if the patient is manipulated by someone to be euthanized?
well, if I go back to my dementia patient, I would say that's a very likely kind of thing, especially since they kind of make decisions independent of past decisions. So in the case of a dementia patient, one of the cases that I've read up before was, so it was a woman, and what she basically asked was she wanted to be killed, but at the right time. Later on, when her disease progressed and she became much, much worse, the doctor came up and said, okay, you're not going to get any better. I think now should be the time, because past this point, it's not going to be pretty. She resisted, and when she resisted, he was confused now. He didn't know what to do because he couldn't proceed, otherwise the family could sue him for malpractice, which is a real thing when it comes to euthanasia. A lot of doctors can tend to be scared of it purely due to that. But when he did consult the family afterwards, well, like I said, it's a very we all agreed, it's a gray area, but one of the family members, I think in this case it was her mother or some aunt, but someone who claimed that they were very close to the patient, they said that she made a decision, it should be right, we need to do this. And it's surprising how this went on, because once she said that, she tried to convince all the other family members to do it because they were hesitant. And you'll understand why they were hesitant at first, even though she did say she wanted to be killed initially. Because when they went through the act of killing her, she was thrashing, she was screaming. She resisted a lot, to the point where they had to tie her down and hold her, and she was struggling all the way until, when he injected it and finally killed her. It was normally, if we were bystanders in this situation, we'd run in and put it to a stop. But in this case, you can understand how complex this kind of problem is.
The doctor must have been it must have destroyed him, to be honest, to do that.
It should have been traumatizing. It would have traumatized me for sure. Even if I knew that they were okay with it, having someone who so obviously hated the fact that they were dying right now, regardless of their mental state, it really does hurt you. And especially when you think about what she was trying to achieve in this situation, that the relative. Because if she, we can't say for sure, but if she hadn't persuaded everyone, who knows what would have happened. At the same time, you have to also consider that the patient herself wasn't doing too well. So, yeah, I mean, you can put one thing on one hand, another thing on the other hand, and try and balance it out. But really, I mean, what would you do? Any of you guys?
In most countries, assisted suicide is illegal, but euthanasia is legal, right? So
It depends on the country, but yeah.
it depends on the country. Okay, I believe that actually assisted suicide should be legalized as well, because if doctor don't want to euthanize that patient, right, and that patient want to end his life, he will try the alternative way to end his life, right? Maybe
Practically speaking, actually, that's true.
maybe on that day he want to die, maybe he put a bomb or what, maybe somebody else will get
Hurt as well.
so I believe that assisted suicide should be a way to carry out.
That is a really good point.
Okay, I will...
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Nick.
I think it's interesting how we draw a difference between physical pain and mental pain.
True as well. True.
With assisted suicide, it does include the legalizing people who are not physically in pain, but they may be mentally in pain. And the only difference, as far as I can tell, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but the only difference between the physical pain and mental pain is that the degree to which you can measure it, I suppose.
Oh, you mean how well another person could observe it, maybe?
Somewhat. It's just, I feel like...
Could you elaborate on the whole mental pain part?
Well, if you say that you want to legalize assisted suicide as well, the difference between... A lot of people have very strong reservations about assisted suicide because it's inclusive of people who are depressed or...
Oh,
Yeah.
I get it. So,
But I think it's interesting how we feel like one version of pain justifies you having the right to end your life, but not the other. And I don't know how to deal with that because it does seem ethically ambiguous to me.
Okay, I'll just add this here. So, just to play the devil's advocate. Technically, if they are having emotional pain, like say depression, you could just give them counseling
right?
instead of
But it
going
does-
to the extent of euthanasia.
Because you can recover
Counseling
from
doesn't
depression.
necessarily always work, does it?
True, very true. I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
Is it? I mean,
No, that's why I like don't really know how to feel about the whole distinction because there are people who you can say that with the physical pain there is definitely like no hope of you being cured, but that doesn't necessarily like not apply to the mental anguish as well.
It's true. And I think it's worth noting here, and I'm really happy with how this, not a good word to use, but yeah, I'm happy with how this conversation is progressing. But in the sense that a lot of people like to paint euthanasia as this picture of this very old person who's just tired of life and is just happy to leave.
a beautiful scene, perhaps.
Yeah, and like
Right.
he's just happy to, just say, thank you for all you've given me, bye.
Ah,
And like this paints a contrasting picture. It's not always the case, which is good. Like this is the sort of conversation that needs to be done, basically. But at the same time, there's also like what Neve said, what CK pointed out. If you don't have euthanasia, what could happen then? CK pointed out how like they might just commit normal suicide, which
Right.
I mean practically it happens. It's a fact. If you don't kill them, they just kill themselves.
you don't need a degree to kill yourself.
Exactly. Smart guy. Yeah,
Oh,
but
that's harsh.
again, there's this question where who gets to judge can you die or not? And because if you think about it, if you have people judging and saying you can die, you can't die, are they playing God?
Even if they are playing God, it's never a decision made by one person.
So do you have a bunch of gods now?
You have a bunch of gods.
I mean, ultimately, the initiating of that chain of decisions would be the person whose life is in question anyway.
True.
I mean, in the end, still go back to the patient because it's his or her life. I believe that if the patient is in the right conditions,
State of
it's
mind.
it's just that they are suffering from mentally pain, but this still can be solved. If it's physically, then can just do it. But if mentally, like just now you say, it's counseling. I know that it doesn't work all the time, but you can at least try. Right? You can at least like.
What if it tries and doesn't work and the patient still wants to die?
Are they really? Can you really claim to be that? Right in your head if you're depressed, like clinical depression wise?
In terms of competence to make decisions, you mean?
Yeah, because your emotion is it's
But
a
then-
negative state.
But then, like,
everything's negative.
that's the personality in the body right now. If that personality doesn't want to live anymore, why shouldn't it be given an obstacle saying you can't die? Like, say a person is depressed. Okay, so what? Like, are they not a person anymore?
I mean, legally, that depression doesn't disqualify you from being competent to make your own decisions legally.
Yeah.
But
But-
you do have a valid point, like that person may not. But you have to like define what a right state of mind is, I suppose.
I think counseling works most of the time.
CK is standing strong.
No, because if they really want to end their life, right? Why they want to go to the doctor? Why?
Because it's legal.
Yeah.
You can't really kill yourself. It's legal.
Are you really? I mean,
If
if you
it-
really care about how legal, like, oh shit, I'm gonna get sued for killing
The
myself.
only issue is if you kill yourself and it fails, then it's an issue. Otherwise, it's if it works, then why not?
I mean, it's a more dignified way to die.
True as well.
That's what.
If I'm going to latch onto CK's point actually, and that as well, I'm sure. Let's just stop looking at the patient for a moment, right? Because remember, there's other parties involved here, and I'm going to take you to the family or the relatives, and I'm going to actually kind of agree with CK on this because, on the whole, if you don't euthanize them, and they end up committing suicide themselves, right? And if you just look at both of these, we realize that suicide, it's done in private. So when people find out, it's a real shock. And it tends to leave everything in a mess. Because I guess some cases of suicide, people like to tie up all the loose ends and all that, whatnot.
Yeah,
But
that's
in
like
other
one of
cases-
the good things about euthanasia, right? Like you sort everything out before you
I
go.
guess.
Yeah. And most cases of suicide, it's
Sudden.
very exactly like they get the impulse, or they've been thinking about it, but they don't think about the others. If they do,
True.
they pull a Hannah Baker and leave some recordings.
Okay, so let's just do a final round of, after this discussion, what you think of euthanasia.
I came in here ready to give my opinion, but honestly, I'm kind of surprised because really the whole point of if we don't euthanize them, they commit suicide, and then the whole impact on everyone, including the doctor. Something I kind of am also considering, which is pretty important. Overall, I still think euthanasia would be quite beneficial to the overall population, especially since you're not exactly forcing people to do it. But at the same time, it does leave a lot of room for some bad incidents, like some things that can traumatize both the doctor and can also leave some bad impressions on the society itself.
And I also think that both euthanasia and assisted suicide got more pros than cons, because first, it's their own life, they have the right to decide themselves. Second, they are actually easing their own pain and also the pain they created for their beloved family and friends as well.
Exactly.
They can move on.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think my opinion has really changed either. I do still think euthanasia should be legal. With assisted suicide, I have some difficulty justifying it, but I will try to figure that out, I suppose. But
Okay.
but I am leaning more towards yes as well.
Agree.
Okay, interesting conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's The Second Opinion, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.